Hey, thanks very much, everyone, to show up this early. It's a hard thing to do at the last day of the conference. So we have 4 papers on the politics of basic income today from different parts of the world. So it will be really interesting. I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce themselves very briefly, 30 seconds, 15-minute talks, 4 in a row, and then we open it up to
First.
Sorry?
And then before presentation.
Yes.
One by one.
Yes,
Right now.
you just introduce yourself since you know yourself best. And also know how to pronounce your names. So,
Hi everybody.
no, there.
Oh, there.
So, yeah, we've been asked for the presentations to happen in front of the thing here.
Hi everybody. Good morning. I am Jang. I am a PhD student in 탐페레 University. I've just started my first year, or just finished the first year. So my presentation is about the law of basic income on the bargaining power of precariats, which is going to be like comparative study between Finland and Korea. So basically today I'm going to present just a brief introduction of my studies. Thank you.
And still there.
Oh, all right.
Presentation there.
Next one. This is like once again, this is gonna be I just really like beginning stage of my research. So this is gonna be just like brief introduction of like the how my research is gonna be like. All right. As we all know, like the share of income between capital and labor is becoming really big. This is like mostly about like structural issue, like which is related to like technical advance and some digitalization or globalization, which is we all know. The thing is that like the problem is this is not like effective. This is not lead to the reintroduction of the income. Rather, it leads to like land seeking or the like a monopoly of capitalism, which sorry. So normally the how production and the distribution works is explained by in 2 different ways, which is more like ages related and which is like more structure based. But here I am focusing on the role of the institution to balance the power relationship, which we know as collective bargaining power. Collective bargaining power is created as a like channel to express like employees dissatisfaction about their working condition and require better conditions. But thing is that like this works to allocate and redistribute the resources between labor and capital. So, but thing is that like the precariat what I'm talking about is excluded from this system. They are suffering from chronic and the multidimensional insecurities, like because their employment status is unstable. So their distinctive positions in labor market and welfare states actually make them like in the vicious cycle and trapped into the precariat trap. But things are then can we find any other way to support this precariat, like by supporting their income directly to deliver the power to individual? So there is like a very like strong and very influencer thesis about this, which is called like basic income in this in this environment thesis. The logic is very simple. The precarious workers are stuck in that position because they cannot escape from there, which is strongly related to income security. So if they are given income security, then we can assume they are more likely to get out of that shit job and to find a better position. But the thing is, like my question is that these like very simple and linear link between basic income and exit option and bargaining power seems theoretically very plausible, but actually practically we have lots of questions that need to be asked. So like if I briefly introduce the debates on the role of basic income on exit option, we can see different like stance. But thing is that like the first one is like we all know like power to say no, which is related to the freedom in decision making process, and it can also like work as like strike fund. It's more like Marxist point of view, and also we can say like some people might be able to actually exercise exit option, but it actually ended up like exit trap because we still have like lots of barriers, like mostly related to like their like structural position in labor market. And also we can also say it affects other people's collective power because like some of them who is already in the relatively better position get out, and then it actually erode the collective power. This looks like conflicting, but actually it's not. It's like more like it shows like different aspects of the argument. So I am asking then under what conditions like basic income actually plays that kind of role in each cases. So I started this studies because I believe like basic income as a policy option, we need to really take account how actually that plays in the real context. So what I want to know is like identifying like specific condition which actually changes the role of basic income in different bargaining contexts. So down there, this is to my aims and the research, building like coherent and a comprehensive theoretical framework which can be used to design better basic income schemes, and also like evaluation after that. And it's gonna be followed by several empirical studies later. So here, first thing we need to know is like power to say no doesn't really mean power against the employer. So which means like even though we do have like enough resources, that doesn't really mean it actually make a difference in bargaining context. So having capability does not mean like they are gonna exercise the power. It does not mean it's gonna be successful. So like we need to, if we break the link with 1 and 2, like we can see the firstly we need to understand how the individual precariat actually perceive that options, which is individual level, and the secondly how it actually works in that context. So as Jurgen also like mentioned in his articles, like it's really important to distinguish different types of exit, which can be like actualized by basic income. So key denominations here is like how they intend to use the exit option. So weak exit means like partly or just temporarily exit from the labor market. and strong one is about like they are using the exit option to make their position better. It can be like moved to like another job. It can be moved to like something completely different, like, you know. And the radical exit means like just leaving the labor market completely. So this dimension is very important because it shows how differently individual understand exit option. And also, it also means like basic income actually works differently. And thirdly, actually there is a specific conditions that is required for each of the exit, you know, to be real. And for the last, it actually different level of it has different level of impact to collective level of bargaining power. So we can use the very it's really useful to see like how precarious is like consist of, and how they are situated in different bargaining power situations. All right, so first, basically, exit and voice option. If for exit and voice option works, first of all, we need to make sure if they have like needs and intention, which means like dissatisfaction and the means to express their dissatisfaction. So I guess like the basic income play like dual role in here to change actually the intention itself or just provide the means. The second, like about the change of intention, I think like when we are given like enough money to survive without job, actually make people feel like it's more bearable about even though the job is precarious still, if income is enough, no matter what, then it can actually reduce even dissatisfaction. So these two different roles can play in this individual level. And if we can see it as a like strategy, we need to see the comparison between like we need to take account the estimated cost and benefit, particularly between like exit and voice. Actually, in different bargaining contexts, voice collective voice has the different power resources, and it works differently in like specific conditions. So this should be like taken account. And then for the last, to make sure if that exit option lead to bargaining power at the macro level, we need to take account the employer's response to the mechanism. So the biggest like difference is exit actually matters for employers only when that level is more than a certain level. So like they can get a signal. While voice actually have like direct impact. So, and after that, we need to also see how employer actually chose to actually take their dissatisfaction based on their options, what kind of option they are available, they have, and then like what is the benefit and cost of those options. So I expect my study to contribute in 2 ways, and theoretically, I'd like to shape the arguments, like how actually the context make it different on the role of basic income and precarious bargaining power by identifying conditions which actually make a difference, And also we can see, based on this, we can see like the actual potential and limitation of bargaining power on this issue. And second of all, like this can be also used, useful to actually design basic income very subject focused and context based. Particularly basic income in this empowerment thesis tend to think like generosity only matters, and then the others is just automatically like gone. Well, by identifying different institutions and the bargaining systems which can actually make different intervene this process, then we can actually see like not only generosity matters and other institutional interaction with basic income actually matters. So yeah, this is pretty much
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hey, immediately over to Somi.
네. 이게 앞으로. Good morning. You still sleepy? A little bit? Yes, me too. My name is Sumi Lee. I am really happy to be here at my alma mater, very proud of Hwaiyan. And today I'm going to talk about politics, people's attention and interest and sentiment on basic income in the US. We do have a fully developed draft, and the paper is conditionally accepted in the basic income studies. So if you are interested, then I can share the draft with you after this session. And my co-author is Taeyong Park, who is at Carnegie Mellon University, Qatar. And he did a lot of like technical work in this paper. So this study, the goal is basically to suggest a way of monitoring public attention and sentiment towards basic income, because we do have occasional public opinion polls, but then they are really like far apart and their framing is all different. So we try to find another way to sort of like feel the public sentiment about like UBI. So the data is, we use the internet data from Google Trends and Twitter. And first of all, with the Google Trends data, we looked at the longitudinal time series of the fluctuations of a basic income opinions, right, in the US. And we also looked at different states, longitudinal trends as well. That is not possible with occasional polling data. So we think that it's supplemental, but probably very useful for other countries as well. And the second Twitter data, we use a natural language processing to analyze the sentiment towards basic income, which is negative or positive, right? So that's what I'm going to show you here. And we did this approach. We took this approach in looking into 50 states and the DC in the US. But you can definitely use this for any country or subnational units. All right, so in the US, as you know, there are two critical junctures. One is Andrew Yang's campaign, national campaign in 2019 Democratic primaries. And then the second one is a COVID pandemic. There are 3 rounds of COVID stimulus checks, ranges from $1,200 to $1,400 for adults, and $400 to $1,400 for children. So each round have a different eligibilities, but there are 3 rounds, and that's got a lot of attention, media attention. Let's see why this tracking opinion is important. Of course, in the politics, right? Public opinion matters in democratic society, and it does affect the policy-making process. And that's why we think that it's important. And the second is there's something called the issue of attention cycle, right? We know that people's time is a scarce resource, so they don't really pay attention to one thing constantly, right? So there's ups and downs over their public attention. All right. So more in the issue of attention cycle, it's like suggested by Anthony Downs in the 1970s. And then what it does is like there are more, some small number of people who became really aware of a policy issue like UBI, like people like us. And then more people got interested in this issue. Then people kind of like aware that, okay, we need to move on, this doesn't work, or this is less of interest, or we have more important things to do, and so on and so forth. So for whatever reason, there's ups and downs of public opinion. But then policy scholars look at something called a policy window, where there could be major changes in policy. So the other policy process theory that was suggested is called a punctuated equilibrium, as you already know. So that doesn't really, the cycles, right? But the cycles doesn't really explain people's attention. So this punctuated equilibrium explains that, well, usually there's a long time of stability of status quo, right? Like a welfare policy in this case for UBI. And then there's some critical juncture, there's a political momentum, and there's a big major change right there. Then that status quo remains for a long time, right? So it's not like ups and downs, but there's like really irregular cycle right there. So like tracking, how people think about UBI, I think in this sense, in this context, is pretty important. So I want to show you a graph. This is annual usage of the terms universal basic income and basic income in New York Times. And I got this one from a paper by Hoens and Rothstein in 2019. When you look at it, then there's like two pretty obvious spikes, right? One is in the 1960s and 70s, and that the other one is late 2010s. And it suggests that the idea of UBI has undergone some period of stability, punctuated by some periods of increased public attention, right? But this is just a New York Times word or usage, but we don't really go back in time and ask people, what do you think of guaranteed income? What do you think of UBI, right? You can't really go back. And so we can take a look at some public opinion polls just to feel the American hearts and minds. And the support level for UBI in the US ranges from 26 to 72%. Sometimes it's really high, sometimes it's really low, depending on when you did the polls and how you ask the question, right? And then another one is subpopulation as well. So it's really difficult to figure out, right, how UBI, people's attitude to UBI could be really well understood. So what we did, so limitations of polls. So the polling is done occasionally, really occasionally, by Gallup polls and other pollsters, and sometimes National Public Radio in the United States, and they don't really change the ups and downs and fluctuations of polls, because it's really just occasional one-time polling, and that their wordings are all different, so it's not really comparable in my opinion. And then a longitudinal survey is really infeasible and expensive. And even if we do the longitudinal survey, usually it's a year apart, right? Even if it's an annual, to really like opinions change pretty fast. So there's that limitation. And then responses forced to answer. What that means is that even if you never really heard of it, in the opinion polls, people ask, the pollsters ask, like, what do you think of the UBI? I don't know, maybe support, maybe, it's not really genuine interest, not really genuine opinion. But, and then the other one is the sample size is so small, like usually 1,000 or less than 2,000. So you can't really see, because sample size is so small, you can't really see the geographic variations with a small sample, right? That's another limitation. And also you can't really ask people, right, their opinion in the past. It's a retrospectively just to recall it, but that's not really the genuine interest at that time, right? So what we do is using the internet data to capture the public interest in UBI. And it's a large volume, and so it can cover a large geography, and it's really frequent. You can get like even hourly, data from this internet data, high frequencies. And then, internet search, of course, this, I'm gonna talk about limitations later, but it's voluntary. Oh, what is the UBI? You search the data on Google or other search engines, and it's self-motivated. So I think that this is a better way to capture the genuine interest of UBI. And it's got instant access. It's easy to download. So anyone can have an access, can download the data because it's freely available. Next. So the data collection is, monthly data from, it could be monthly, it could be daily, but we did use a monthly data between 2018 through 2021 because Andrew Yang's campaign started in, early 2018, but then they got attention in 2019. So we just use this time period to cover Andrew Yang's campaign and the pandemic. And we can definitely expand the search as well. So the first one is to see the trend, longitudinal trend, Google Trends. And then the second one is to get the sentiment about UBI using the Twitter data. So we use two different algorithms. And the first one, second one, the difference is the second one, right? Second one does have a better job in social media text like emojis and exclamation mark, that kind of thing. So that's the only difference, but they are lexicon-based algorithms. So this is the first snapshot, and this is really like readily available data. You can just download it, but this is what it is. What do you think? Between 2018 to 2021, this is a relative rank. The highest interest, actually, search terms entered is a Washington state, and then Washington, D.C., then California, right? The usual suspects. But then the lowest interest, I think it's very interesting, Mississippi, Texas, and then Arkansas, right? So we don't really hear much about UBI from these states, so it does show like the pattern, but this is pretty much readily available data. You don't need any processing. This one is what we did for Google searches and see that create the longitudinal data for the US. And what you see is a green line indicating the Google trend search. And the blue line is a Twitter volume about UBI. The pattern seems to be pretty similar, right? And then since 2018, there's a gradual increase in both Twitter volume and the Google search term. Then in 2019 and 2020, there's a little, more increase in interest. And in 2019, around the pandemic, there's a huge spike that shows people's interest in these terms. And that's not necessarily like UBI, but this one is about UBI and universal basic income, but I'm suspecting that people also look for like COVID checks and other terms as well. So around that time, people really got interested in that concept of cash transfers.
But what were the search terms?
No.
I'll show you later.
Questions later.
Yeah. And then this is the state level because Google data, when you download it, it's not really comparable geographically. So we had to rescale, and it's really, it's freely available in the Python library. If you want to, my course actually wrote that code. And when you see this, then Washington State is the highest, and California, and we are showing Iowa and Texas because what we see is that there is a little, similar patterns of all the states. So it's not that when you focus on one state, that doesn't really show like huge spike, for instance, like pilots and stuff like that. But some national campaign that focused on state, like entrance campaign in Iowa, around Iowa primary, there's a huge spike. So there's definitely Andrew Yang's influence that we see it here. So yeah, I'm just gonna show you the Twitter analysis. This is a sentiment analysis from Vader, and then when you see the red line is a sentiment. So before COVID, it's pretty, it's positive, relatively speaking, but then after COVID, it got, it decreased. That means it doesn't mean that the sentiment got negative, but it's less positive because when you see the blue line, there's a huge spike in volume in terms of interest. So a lot more people got interested in this project and interested in this concept. There are more people who are skeptical about this idea, got really participated in this online discussion forum. So that's the conclusion that I want to give you. And then more analysis, interpretation, and the search terms and stuff like that, I'll answer it in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sonia. We have some papers, but it's really very, very fast. Tyler, you're up next.
Great. Good morning. I'm Tyler Prohaska from National Jeonju University, where I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm also with UBI Taiwan. Today, I'm going to talk about the process of localizing novel basic income policies, or what might be called basic income-like policies, specifically in Taiwan and South Korean context. Although South Korea, the plan was that would largely start when I came to South Korea to get an idea of where that direction of comparison would go. So I'm going to give you a rough idea, and I'd actually love to hear your advice as I continue this research. So most of the discussion I'll give is more about Taiwan specifically, and then advice you can give about South Korea would be greatly appreciated. So what I'm interested in is the idea of policy innovation in different domestic contexts, because ultimately that's how basic income is going to be implemented. We talk about it as a universal idea in a sense that it can be applied the same way in every single context. That's how a lot of the philosophical discussion has gone on for a long time. But in reality, which is what the conference is about, when you are implementing basic income, you have to consider those specific contexts. And I think that there's actually a gap in the literature about that process of localizing basic income. What are the factors that determine how basic income is applied in that particular domestic context? So that's what I'm investigating, but I'll say that I haven't actually come to a conclusion yet. So again, if you have your own ideas, I'm also curious. And I would believe that in each context, it's likely very different, actually, about the factors that are determinative for a particular domestic political process. So the way that I'm going about this is I'm looking at the experts, the folks who were involved in policymaking, who were either stakeholders or actually designing and implementing the basic income-like programs. because I want to understand their motivations about why they designed it in a particular way and why it was implemented in a particular way. Okay, we can skip that. So in the case of Taiwan and Korea, the reason that ultimately my PhD mentor recommended these two cases is because they're quite similar in many ways. Taiwan and Korea democratize at similar times. They have similar feelings about communism. There's a very similar cultural underpinning for both countries. And even a lot of the way that their economy functions is very similar. So where that difference comes from is what I'm actually investigating to see what makes their approaches different. And now I'm going to talk about the way I see their approaches being different towards these basic income-like policies. One of the differences that is discussed, at least in the market structure of Taiwan versus Korea, is that Korea has a lot more dominance of large corporations. And so that has a large effect on the way that their politics is run. Whereas in Taiwan, it's largely small and medium enterprises that hire the majority of individuals in Taiwan. And so that also affects the way that Taiwan institutions operate based on that idea. So, for example, in Taiwan, that affects the way that tax revenue can be generated because it's actually very difficult to generate tax in Taiwan, as I'll discuss later on. So that could be a factor in the way that Taiwanese politicians go about designing particular programs with the idea that they have very limited capacity to actually generate the revenue necessary for more radical proposals, perhaps. Whereas in Korea, it's actually large corporations. In some ways, it's much easier to capture that money because it's one entity. And so in some instances, that might be an easier way to generate revenue as opposed to many, many small enterprises, as you see in Taiwan. Okay, so for the Taiwan context briefly, I just want to kind of give an idea of what's happening and the kind of underpinning of why basic income in some sense has started to become a conversation. There's been very limited wage improvements in the last 20 years. And a lot of folks are especially hurting now because of the inflation that's occurring globally. But even in Taiwan, where the GDP has been growing, the GDP actually had a record growth during the pandemic, but there was not a particularly great improvement in the real wages for individuals. In fact, this year we were seeing a decrease in real wages because of inflation. So this is what we're seeing, that labor as a share of the GDP has been declining, whereas profit share for these companies have been increasing. So a lot of the same problems we're seeing around the world are making their way into Taiwan. Taiwan used to be one of the Asian tigers. It was kind of it also had its own economic miracle it's experiencing, but that miracle has slowly dwindled away. And a lot of the young folks that are feeling that stagnation are now leaving Taiwan. Okay, let me actually go back to this part. Okay, so I'll briefly mention when we were talking about the tax revenue, Taiwan, you might not know, has one of the lowest tax burdens in the world. It's around 16%, which is lower than Hong Kong, which is seen as this capitalist paradise with low taxes, virtually no regulation. But Taiwan, which is seen as sort of a democratic, very progressive Asian country, is even lower than Hong Kong. So there's a reason for that, and I think that is the way that the structure of the economy has grown up around these SMEs. It's very difficult to persuade them to share some of that tax revenue with the government, and they have very creative ways of getting around that. And so the enforcement is also quite inefficient in terms of generating that revenue. So as I'm investigating, what I've heard from Taiwanese politicians is they've complained about the fact that there's just not that revenue necessary, that the only way that you get towards something like what we're seeing with other countries, even Korea, for welfare reform or welfare improvements, you have to fix the tax system first. And if you can't improve that enforcement, then all the other things that we want to do are very difficult. So when it comes to even welfare, Taiwan is very low as a percent of GDP. I believe the OECD average is still around 20-some%. That might be increasing to some extent, but nonetheless, Taiwan has stayed relatively low as a share of GDP. And the cultural feeling towards welfare is kind of portrayed as wasteful. And this is something that we see when we discuss something like UBI with the Taiwanese public, is they're concerned that where's that money going to go? How's the money going to be used? There's a kind of a paternalistic feeling about it. And when we proposed the cash transfers during the pandemic, we worked with the opposition party, the People Party, to propose turning the vouchers into a cash transfer. So this was the debate in Taiwan, was whether or not we should send vouchers, because we were concerned that folks would just save the money as opposed to actually spending the money during the pandemic. And if you want a stimulus effect, you have to spend it. And they said, look at Japan, they sent out cash and it was just saved. And Taiwan is very similar in that extent. But our argument was that the first thing you should do before you attempt to stimulate the economy is focus on the individual, that the individual, their security and their particular financial security should be prioritized over stimulating any business at any given time. So the other argument that we were making was that the vouchers are mostly inefficient way to try to get out cash. It was very slow. We turned out to be correct about that. It took a lot longer time to get the vouchers out to Taiwanese. They did end up spending millions of extra dollars in terms of the bureaucracy of pushing out the vouchers. And the effect was basically the same as cash, because they just substituted the spending that they would have done with cash using the voucher. So the voucher was kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it was an inefficient way to go about sending out this assistance. On the other hand, it did have the feeling of creating some kind of effect on Taiwan's society, because there were many campaigns by both businesses and politicians who were talking about the vouchers. You felt the vouchers because they were a physical package that you received, and they were labeled as these vouchers during that period. Whereas with cash, you don't necessarily have that feeling, as we saw with the child tax credit in the United States. There was not much of a real uprising of feeling of that this was some assistance that the government now has given me. The cash went in and it improved people's lives, but there's one thing is improving people's lives, but the other thing is that they have to feel it too. And so I'm a bit conflicted about the way that Taiwan approached the vouchers. We did this, Taiwan did this twice. We did it with around $100 to $200 with the vouchers, and both times we worked with the opposition parties to try to turn it into cash. But on the other hand, it did in fact have that feeling of we are receiving assistance from the government, and people supported it for that reason. They felt like they were getting something. So circling back, when we held this press conference with the People Party to convert the vouchers into cash, the ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party, released a statement in response to our press conference that said, if you need cash, go to your family, which I was very intrigued by this concept that during the pandemic, when they forcibly shut down businesses, they said, well, go to your family who might have lost their jobs in that period. The other reason I found that curious was because Taiwan, the way that they did the cash assistance was extremely bureaucratic. It was essentially copying their existing bureaucratic system and then expanding it a bit. So you had to go in, you had to prove that you had paid into the labor insurance scheme, but most of the most vulnerable workers don't pay into that scheme because their employers don't want them to pay into it, because then they have labor protections. So anyway, so there's this also a cultural issue that a lot of folks actually support, the idea that welfare should still be seen as a function of the family. Even the Progressive Party in Taiwan made that statement in response to the voucher program. And then quickly for this year, we did have our first universal cash transfer in Taiwan's history. And there was a debate, again, about whether this is an efficient use of our tax surplus. So the debate ended up being that whether we should put this into something like the deficit for healthcare, the deficit for labor insurance, and things like that, or whether we should send it back to the people, because as we discussed earlier, the GDP had record-breaking growth, but it wasn't really felt by the people. That wasn't improving wages, and so they sent that back as a $200 cash transfer. First time Taiwan has ever done a universal cash transfer. But the interesting thing was, as I mentioned, there wasn't a feeling. Nobody felt that, and I was kind of intrigued that the feeling toward the cash was actually, I think the reaction was much less than that of the voucher. So that could be behind the design as well. There's a political calculus that if you want to generate a feeling, it needs to be seen. Okay, so I have a lot of other things about Taiwan that we can discuss. There's some polling that we've done. But I want to quickly talk about what we've seen in Gyeonggi and Korea. We've spoken with a lot of folks, very interesting people, just briefly. So we've spoken to the BI party, and we've spoken to the Democratic Party. Sure. And the feeling that I'm getting is number one, they're trying to find categories of sympathy in Korea because, so for example, in Gyeonggi, they said their calculus was that they're looking at farmers as a very sympathetic and economically disadvantaged group. And so that's why they chose farmers. And now for political reasons, they're renaming the basic income into other things like opportunity grants or something like that, because they're trying to distance themselves from controversial politicians. And so that's also an element of this. Is there's certainly party politics, even BI party and the Democratic Party. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this because a lot of them are here, but they do have some fights about the size of basic income, the grant, how large it should be. And that's part of the reason that they were not necessarily fully supportive of Lee Jae-myung. And we spoke to Lee's folks as well about the way that the farmers' income was structured and why it was structured in the way that it was. So if you're interested in our discussions with Lee's folks, we spoke to his presidential campaign. I can kind of talk about some raw ideas and feelings and observations, but they haven't been fully structured yet. I think that's my time.
Good.
Thank you.
Perfect. And our last contributor is Professor Wiesław Bobrikov, who will be joining us online with some assistance from Alexandra Pilius for translation purposes. So this will be a talk on over to Professor Bobrikov.
Yes,
Brief
yes.
introduction and then 15 minutes, please.
Вам слово, Вячеслав Николаевич.
Что с презентацией не могу допустить?
Just a small second. The presentation
We're not going anywhere.
legs. Thank you for this.
Did rehearse.
In rehearsals, it always
Yes.
goes well.
Exactly.
Нельзя тогда запустить оттуда их.
Ну, запускайте.
Я не вижу, понимаешь, что я вижу. Это тренировки наши приводят к тому, что это. Yes.
Okay, we're getting there.
Видно презентацию? Да?
Ну да, на весь экран теперь сделайте,
Да,
пожалуйста.
да, да.
Мгм.
Yeah, perfect.
Dear colleagues, my name is Vyacheslav Babkov. I am a doctor of economics professor. I work at the Institute of Economics of the Russian Academy of Sciences and at the Plekhanov Russian University of Economics in Moscow. I and my colleagues would like to present for your consideration the results of a research project carried out in Russia in 2018-2022. It is decided to explore the possibilities of introduction and universal basic income. We have studied the readiness of Russian society to introduce an UBI. For this purpose, sociological surveys of experts and Russian citizens were conducted. This study was attended by 51 experts who represented the scientific and teaching community, Russian business and trade unions, as well as state and municipal authority. Russian citizens were respondents, more than 1,200 respondents from the following target categories of the population. Firstly, who were families with children. Secondly, college graduates applying for a job for the first time. Thirdly, workers with precarity of employment, non-month internal migrant workers and platform workers. The results of study are presented in the current report. This slide shows that about 30% of the target population and about 6% of experts believe that Russia is fully ready to introduce basic income. About 50% in each groups believe that basic income in Russia should be introduced only for target categories of the population and link its receipt with poverty or the difficult life situation. At the same time, about 45% of experts and about 25% of respondents believe that Russia is not ready for either full or partial introduction of basic income.
Слав Николаевич, прошу прощения, а вы можете микрофон чуть ближе к себе?
Asked for him to speak a bit louder.
Next slide present the answer of experts and respondents to the question about the goals of introduction basic income. Experts and respondents identified two priority goals. The first one is to overcome absolute poverty and ensure a minimum standard of living. The second one is to reduce socio-economic inequality. Next slide presents answer to the question about the method. About the method. Next slide presents the answer of experts and respondents to the question about the goals and of introduction of basic income. Experts and respondents identified two priority goals. The first one is to overcome absolute poverty and ensure a minimum standard of living. The second one is to reduce socioeconomic inequality. Next slide presents answer to the question about the method of payment of basic income and its combination with existing social benefits. 13% of respondents believe that the state should guarantee payment to every citizen of the country from birth to death, a guaranteed minimum income, not lower than the subsistence minimum, and about 53% of experts believe that this payment should be added to the existing social benefits and not set instead of them. Next slide shows the non-material benefits that respondents expect if they receive a basic income. More than 60% of respondents believe that the introduction of this payment will expand employment opportunities and the possibility of working in their occupation. In addition, more than 50% of respondents expect that the establishment of this payment will lead to reduction in the stress they have due to the possibility of losing their job and income, especially since they usually don't have savings. In the course of the study, a simulation of the payment of basic income was carried out. We developed two simulation models. The first one is a model designed to overcome absolute poverty, and the second one is a model designed to solve three tasks at the same time. These tasks are payments to poor households to overcome absolute poverty, payments of unemployment benefits in the amount of 2 subsistence minimums, and payments to all children under 18 years of age in the amount of the subsistence minimum, regardless of the financial situation of their household. The simulation results showed that if basic income payments are made according to the above models, then people will spend more than before its introduction. The growth of consumer demand will lead to increase in the production of goods and services. Moreover, this will allow the state to receive additional income, which will be enough both to continue paying basic income and for additional investments in the country's economy. Next slide shows the results of our research. It is included specific designs for low-income families with children, for young workers who graduated from educational institutions and entered the labor market for the first time, for unemployed people who were registered at employment centers, and for workers at risk of precarity of employment, especially for workers engaged in employment based on digital platforms. In conclusion, I would like to say that our expert group has prepared a monograph on all the above mentioned aspects of the study. The monograph is called Universal Basic Income. Universal Basic Income is a chance for Russia. It was published in 2022. Brief information about the monograph was posted in the Jang website, and everyone can read it at the link. If any of you are interested, we can send the book by email. This year we have held several presentations of this book in the scientific community, in the business community, in the public administration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Professor Bobrikov gave a slightly shorter talk, which is actually very good for our question and answer session, of course. So thanks to all the speakers. So we have a lot of interesting papers dealing with different aspects, different approaches to politics, but also in a very, very different context. So I would say I'm happy to take short questions. Please direct your question to either speaker, or if it's meant to be more general, just indicate that. Alma's first.
I have a question for Tyler. It wasn't quite clear to me from your presentation. Did the Taiwanese government send out a message, right, with the vouchers, right, that this was meant to be stimulus? Please go out and spend it. Like this will help revitalize the economy, or not?
You want me to answer now or later?
Sure.
Okay. They did, and the big discussion was about saving it. They really didn't want people to save it, so they could go out right now and buy, and it was a coordinated campaign with businesses. So that's why I'm conflicted, because the cash had nothing anywhere similar effect. The 2 rounds of universal vouchers were big campaigns between the government and businesses. The businesses had special deals you could do. If you gave all of your vouchers to them, they'd give you cards with bonuses, and you'd expand the vouchers. So it was inefficient in one sense, but the feeling that it produced, I mean, there was just so much more attention about the vouchers than the cash. And it wasn't just a signal, it was a coordinated campaign that I think in that sense was very successful. And then the other reason it, in a sense, it was successful was because it was much easier to do that as universal, as perhaps maybe a permanent policy I could see us doing of that permanent voucher. But the cash issue was only because it was seen as a tax rebate. So it's just giving back money that we already paid in that tax year. So I think that the politics of a universal voucher is probably easier than a universal, even a small basic income. It would almost certainly be targeted.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Peter.
And for Sumi, I wondered, what are the search terms though? Did it include freedom dividend or UBI or all of the above? What were the search terms for Google?
This is not the terms, this is a topic. So universal basic income topic includes UBI, and then guaranteed income, like related topics. And it's kind of arbitrary if we pick these specific terms, because when I pick them, then that's gonna yield a different results. So you and I can use this topic instead of a specific, you can use specific terms. So it's really flexible, and you can see if there's any different results depending on which terms you use. You can use guaranteed income as a topic, guaranteed income as a term, or UBI as a term or topic. So this is why internet data is a lot more flexible. You can use it in different ways. And another thing is, in the US, if I search in Korean, the universal basic income, 기본소득, then it's going to capture only the Korean language. But if you use a topic in English, then it's going to capture all other different languages in the topic. So that's why it has an advantage than other specific terms.
I just want to say, if anyone online has a question, feel free to put it in the chat box or just indicate with, you know, the waving hand thing, and we're happy to let you ask a question as well. So, failing that, no one there. Eduardo first.
Yesterday, Guy Sterling told us that he was invited by the Ukrainian government to think about a basic income in Ukrainian. And today, Professor Bobrikov is saying that Russia might also have a basic income. I would like to listen, perhaps, Professor Bobrikov, would you recommend that that the basic income might be one of the main instruments for peace between Russia and Ukraine? That's my question.
Okay, Professor Bobrikov.
I will translate the question
Sure.
for Professor Bobrikov. Thanks. Вячеслав Николаевич, вот задают вопрос по поводу того, что в прошлом году, кажется, ну, в предыдущие годы слышали про эксперименты с базовым доходом в Украине. А сейчас вот вы рассказываете, что, ну, в России тоже идет работа по поводу базового дохода. Как вы считаете, такая мера, как базовый доход, может ли способствовать миру России и Украины?
A very easy question, yes.
Да, мы же ученые, исследователи, да? Поэтому
They're scientists, first of all.
любые, так сказать, войны, они мешают коммуникации между исследователями. Вот. Но тем не менее,
Давайте я по предложению буду.
Да.
All the wars, unfortunately, first of all, bring distortion to the communication between the scientists and the institutions.
У нас много друзей на Украине. Мы до начала вот этой острой фазы конфликта поддерживали очень тесные связи между собой, в том числе и по проблеме исследования базового дохода и прекарити, неустойчивой занятости, которые тоже взаимосвязаны между собой.
Before the war has started, actually, they had a lot of contacts with Ukrainian scientists, and especially was interesting in the work done on the topic of basic income and precarities.
Я надеюсь, что недолго еще до того времени, когда мы возобновим наше сотрудничество.
Professor Bobrikov hopes actually that it's going to be soon enough when the whole communication and scientific communication will be resumed.
I think thank you very much. We have two more questions lined up, and I think that's probably going to be all the time we have. Maybe we can take them sort of the questions together and then let people respond. So Yong-Soo first, and then.
Can I just speak here?
Yeah. Should be just.
So
Any microphones?
without microphone.
Microphones.
Ceiling.
So is there any serious policy discussion within the government or Russian parliament?
So this is a question to Professor Bobrikov as well. We'll take the other question first, and then we'll let people respond. So Philippe,
Just a question to Sumi, if you could just comment on the exact meaning of the two curves, the black one and the red one on your last slide. And also this, well, let's answer.
So there's a,
Can I?
we'll
Okay.
reach. And actually, since the short questions, since Jeeun didn't have a question, I'm going to ask you one. So I'm going to ask you later on to just say something about your two cases, because you're comparing Finland and Korea, and I think people will be really interested to know why that's the case. So we have three questions for First, let's start with Professor Bobkov as well. So has there been any discussion in the Russian parliament before on basic income specifically?
Вячеслав Николаевич, расскажите, пожалуйста, какие были разговоры и действия со стороны правительства в России, ну, до всех действий в отношении базового дохода в России?
Ну, да, у нас вот последние выборы, когда были в парламенте, одна из партий, она называется «Справедливая Россия», парламентская партия, она в качестве основной своей программного положения выдвинула идею, так сказать, введения безусловного базового дохода в России. И прежде всего
Да,
для
сейчас-
семей, которые с детьми, которые имеют низкий доход.
Переведу сначала.
Мгм.
Before it all started, actually, there was one political party, official one, so Parliament Party, which has included basic income program in their election program, actually. And first of all, the basic income scheme, which they chose, was to start with the people of low income, so to support low income families.
Во время ковида, в фазе ковида в 2020 году, правительство использовало выплату типа базового дохода для всех семей, независимо от дохода. То есть было на несколько месяцев установлена выплата всем семьям до 18 лет, в которых есть дети до 18 лет, выплачивали, так сказать, сумму, ну, если говорить по российским меркам, примерно в размере прожиточного минимума. Всем семьям, в которых есть дети, на каждого ребенка, в течение нескольких месяцев такая выплата была установлена.
When it was the COVID time, Moscow government paid actually all families who had children below 18 the minimum guaranteed, so the minimum income actually, but it was to all of them. So it was kind of also the part of basic income, if you can see it. So several months for each child, the families received unconditionally this income, and it went automatically, which was quite new for Russia.
Когда
No, sorry, we're going to have to keep it short because we're running out of time. I'm very, very sorry, but this was really interesting information. So very quick response from Sumi and then Jeeun, and then we've been asked to prepare the room for the next time.
So I'm just gonna show you this one. This blue one is a volume, Twitter volume. So around the COVID, it spiked dramatically, but then this
The volume of
of the Twitter tweets about universal basic income. Okay, so it's about like their interest
about the topic.
about the topic. So
Neutral, positive and negative.
positive and negative, just the
Was
volume,
it the
how much
spring-
interest
spring of
there is.
2020?
Yeah.
Spring of 2020, the peak time.
This is 2020, March 2020
March,
in the US when
alright.
Trump declared the emergency and
Yeah,
announced
can-
whatever.
Shall
And
we
then-
quickly put it up here? Which slide is it?
Oh, the
Just-
last one. Almost the last one. Yeah, that one.
This?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the volume. So a lot more interest, positive or negative, whatever, right? And around the time, this is the sentiment, red one. The sentiment is on this side. If it's a greater than 0, it's positive sentiment. If it's less than 0, then it's a negative sentiment. But still,
Europe, just Europe.
this is the US.
It says Europe.
Oh, in Europe.
UBI in Europe, the title.
No, the title's wrong. I'm sorry. Because
So-
we are doing the Europe thing as well. I'm so sorry. But then in the US, positive, and then when there's a volume spike, there's more negative opinions came in, a lot of debates. So it got less positive, but it's still over 0, which is positive.
Okay, and so my question was really then, in order to determine what positive reactions are, you index in a way, or you do various terms, adjectives, and so
Yeah.
on, and then you aggregate
Yes.
that.
We did the algorithm that has a dictionary. And so the machine categorizes if it's positive and negative based on the words in the tweet.
Okay,
Great. Very briefly, Jeeun, why Korea and Finland?
So basically the main aim of my study is to see like how basic income differently operate in different contexts, and particularly in which is related to like exit and voice, like as an individual strategy. So as we all know, like Korea and Finland has completely different bargaining systems, collectively and individually. Based if we classify the based on the clarification, the Korea is basically have like very marginal welfare state and very weak bargaining power of union trade union. And on the other hand, like Finland has like very like already have like pretty good welfare system, and also have very strong collective power. Even like the solidarity between like regular workers and irregular workers are pretty strong too. So I want to see the how actually, you know, people when they are given the certain amount of money, how they actually like decide to exit or like join the collective actions. So like see the how actually differently affected in these two different countries.
But in Finland, it was unemployed people. Well, what are they bargaining for if they're unemployed?
But this is not about the experiment. Okay, sorry, sir. We're gonna have to cut this off because we're gonna eat into the time of the next section. So thanks to the 4 speakers, 3 here, 1 online, very interesting, and lots more to discuss, which we can pick up during the rest of the day if you want. I'm sure the speakers are all available to be bothered all day. So.
The rest of the-
What?